Coming up today, Korea's main opposition party rejects a proposal for talks on the history textbook issue. The NPAD says the talks would be meaningless and they've vowed to dig in their heels. South Korea sides with the United States over the South China Sea dispute. Seoul's defense chief says freedom of navigation should be guaranteed. Plus, the United States and Britain fear there's increasing evidence the Russian plane that crashed in Egypt was brought down by a bomb. The UK and Ireland ground flights to and from Sharm el-Sheikh. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello, it's noon on Thursday, the 5th of November. You're tuned in to our midday newscast here on Arirang TV. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Broome. And we start with the issue sending shockwaves through the domestic political scene. Korea's main opposition party has rebuffed a proposed meeting between the floor leaders of the two main rival parties called by the National Assembly Speaker as they try to resolve the parliamentary deadlock over the government's decision to retake control of history textbook publishing. New Politics Alliance for Democracy party floor leader Lee Geunhye said at a general party meeting this morning that the proposed meeting would be pointless because neither side is going to back away from their stance. He vowed to seek every means necessary to block the government's textbook plan, but hinted that the party's current parliamentary boycott could not go on forever. Today, the ruling Seoul party ignored the boycott and convened a meeting of the Budget Committee to review the 2016 budget proposal. Jaein, leader of Korea's main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy, has hinted that he won't make another bid for the presidency if the NPAD fails to win next year's general election. In a televised interview on Wednesday night, the 62-year-old leader, who lost the 2012 presidential election, said his political fate is tied to the party's showing in next April's polls. He added that if he can't lead the NPAD to victory, he'll consider it the limit of his political clout. The next presidential election is set for late 2017. Mr. Moon also stressed his party will continue attacking the government and the ruling party over the decision to reintroduce state-issued history textbooks to the nation's secondary schools. He said the public supports the NPAD's position that the textbook plan should be scrapped. Now, Korea sided with the US and expressed its support for freedom of navigation in disputed waters in the South China Sea. Korea voiced its position as an ASEAN defense ministers meeting in Malaysia came to a close yesterday. Connie Kim reports.
South Korea's defense chief says freedom of navigation in the South China Sea should be guaranteed. The comments by Han Min-gu are significant because of where he made them, at a meeting of ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting Plus in Malaysia, with the U.S. and Chinese defense chiefs in attendance.
The freedom of navigation and flight in and over the South China Sea should be guaranteed. I conveyed South Korea's stance on the dispute with the hope it would be resolved peacefully.
The South China Sea is the main shipping route for South Korean vessels carrying exports and 90% of the country's energy imports. Tensions over the area have risen after the U.S. sailed a destroyer into the area last week, within 12 nautical miles or 20 kilometers of one of the man-made islands China claims. The 12 nautical limit is internationally recognized as sovereign territory, but the U.S. does not recognize China's claims in the area. Both the U.S. and Japan, along with the Philippines and Vietnam, pushed to include freedom of navigation in the South China Sea in the joint declaration. China was against the idea, and the meeting failed to issue a joint declaration for the first time. The row in the South China Sea is expected to continue, as U.S. Defense Secretary Ashton Carter is reportedly going to cruise into the area on the USS Theodore Roosevelt on Thursday. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Now, the International Monetary Fund says Korea's per capita GDP will top $30,000 by next year and get very close to Japan's by the year 2020. However, experts say that Korea, flanked on either side by Japan and China, will have to reform its industrial structure to stay competitive. Park Se-young reports.
In 5 years, Korea's GDP per capita will rise to nearly $37,000, drawing close to that of Japan's. According to the IMF's World Economic Outlook database, the nation's per capita GDP will reach $36,750 in 2020, a 31% rise from last year's $27,970. Japan's per capita GDP is forecast to see a 6% rise over the same period to slightly over $38,000. In 2005, the GDP per capita of Japan was nearly 2 times that of Korea's. Last year, Korea's per capita GDP adjusted to purchasing power parity came in at $35,400, close to Japan's $37,500. In 2018, Korea's numbers are forecast to overtake Japan's. The latest figures show Korea is narrowing the economic gap with Japan. Last year, Japan's GDP was $4.6 trillion, 3 times bigger than Korea's. According to the IMF's database, Korea's 2014 GDP of $1.4 trillion will rise to $1.9 trillion in 2020, reducing the gap to 2.4 times. In this year's IMD World Competitiveness Ranking, Korea climbed 1 notch to 25th, while Japan tumbled 6 spots to 27th. Meanwhile, the economic gap between China and Korea is expected to widen from just over 7 times last year to 9 times in 2020. Experts say Korea will have to stay competitive by reforming its industrial structure and developing highly profitable products to ensure it keeps pace with the Japanese and Chinese economies over the next 5 years. Park Se-young, Arirang News.
Janet Yellen, chair of the US Federal Reserve, has hinted at a rate hike in December, saying it is a live possibility. Testifying before the US House Financial Services Committee on Wednesday, Yellen said that if rates do go up next month, they will only rise gradually to nurture the economic recovery in the US. Following Yellen's remarks, analysts said the probability of a Fed rate hike in December increased to about 60%. Fed policymakers have 6 weeks to analyze all the data and debate before the Federal Open Market Committee's next meeting on December 15th and 16th. Staying with the US, and that nation's trade deficit narrowed sharply to hit a 7-month low in September thanks to the lowest oil imports in a decade. The US Commerce Department said Wednesday that the trade deficit gap fell 15% to $40.8 billion, the lowest level since February. Exports rose 1.6% to $187.9 billion, helped by stronger sales of services, automobiles and commercial airplanes. Imports, on the other hand, fell 1.8% to $228.7 billion. The big drop in oil prices sent petroleum imports down 8.3%, the lowest level they've been since May 2004. Now, the bad news for Volkswagen just keeps on coming, as Germany's transport minister has revealed that some 98,000 petrol vehicles are caught up in the diesel emissions scandal. Now, this is the first time petrol engines have been implicated in the emissions rigging. They are among the 800,000 cars that Volkswagen admitted on Tuesday had understated carbon dioxide emission levels and consequently fuel usage. Following the announcement, Volkswagen's shares plunged almost 10% on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. Back here in Korea, sales of Volkswagen cars have dropped by over 70%. The Korea Automobile Importers and Distributors Association said today that only 947 Volkswagen cars were registered in October compared to the 2,900 registered in September. And now to the latest on the Russian aircraft that crashed over Egypt, killing all 224 people on board. And days after Cairo dismissed the Islamic State militant group's claim of responsibility for the crash, British and American officials now suggest it could be possible. Iji-won has more.
Britain's Foreign Secretary has pointed to an explosive device as the cause of Saturday's plane crash.
We have concluded that there is a significant possibility that that crash was caused by an explosive device on board the aircraft.
U.S. intelligence sources now also suggest the crash may have been caused by a bomb planted on the plane by ISIS or an affiliate. Egyptian authorities have previously dismissed the possibility of terrorist involvement. Reuters cited an Egyptian source who said that the current examination of the plane's 2 black box recorders and an ongoing forensic investigation will help determine the cause of the crash. ISIS, again, claimed responsibility for the crash on Wednesday, prompting Britain to order suspension of all flights to and from the Egyptian resort of Sharm el-Sheikh, from where the plane departed. The Russian passenger plane went down on Saturday just 23 minutes after it departed from Sharm el-Sheikh for St. Petersburg, killing all 224 people on board. 이지원, Arirang News.
Now back here in Korea, and President Park Geun-hye's Preparatory Committee for Reunification held its 6th meeting earlier on this Thursday. The Presidential Office of Geunhye said the meeting was aimed at reviewing progress made in unification preparation over the past year. There, President Park stressed the importance of homogeneity between South and North Korea in ending 70 years of division on the Korean peninsula. For that, she said the two Koreas must engage in a constructive dialogue to expand cooperation and people-to-people exchanges. The president also called on Pyongyang to abide by its earlier commitments with the international community and give up its nuclear weapons program. South Korea's Foreign Minister Byungse is in Luxembourg today for a gathering of foreign ministers affiliated with the Asia-Europe meeting. At the meeting aimed at working together for a sustainable and secure future, Minister Yoon will call for global cooperation on curbing North Korea's nuclear ambitions. He will also ask member countries for bilateral and multilateral support for President Park Geun-hye's Eurasia initiative. 51 foreign ministers from 30 European and 21 Asian countries will attend the two-day meeting. Now, people in the world's wealthiest nations are expected to live 10 years longer on average than they did 40 years ago. Life expectancy in South Korea has rose accordingly, however. A large gap remains between men and women. Son Jung-in has this report.
According to the latest health report released by the OECD, the life expectancy of South Koreans born in 2013 stood at 81.8 years, placing the nation 11th among the 34 member countries. The figure represents a half-year rise from 81.3 the previous year. By gender, girls born in 2013 were expected to live to an average age of 85.1 years, the 5th highest among the nations. Boys were expected to live 78.5 years, ranking in 20th place. In general, average lifespan across all OECD nations reached 80.4 years, as wealthy countries, including South Korea, gained more than 10 years in life expectancy since 1970. Japan topped the charts at 83.4, followed by Spain and Switzerland. At the bottom were Russia, India, and in last place South Africa, where life expectancy was around 27 years under that seen in Japan. Looking at major risk factors for health, smoking, alcohol, and obesity, South Korea's alcohol consumption was below the OECD average, but its smoking rate continued to be high. Nearly 20% of Koreans smoke every day. That's 3.3 percentage points higher than the OECD average. Child obesity has become more commonplace in most countries, increasing the risk of weight-related health issues in later life. Son Jung-in, Arirang News.
Now, Forbes has revealed its annual list of the world's most powerful people. The man on top of the list for the third straight year is Vladimir Putin. Forbes says the Russian leader continues to prove he's one of the few men in the world powerful enough to do what he wants and get away with it. German Chancellor Angela Merkel, as you can see, is second. She beat out US President Barack Obama, who came in third. And it marks the first time a sitting US president has not been in the top two, in fact. Pope Francis and Chinese President Xi Jinping rounded out the top five in fourth and fifth, respectively. The list is based on several factors, including the amount of human and financial resources they have control over, as well as their ability to influence world events. Now, one of the country's oldest stone relics, the three-story high Sok Gatap Pagoda, is being restored and will be open to the public early next year. Our Kim Ji-yeon has this report on what's special about the restoration process.
Restoring a 1,300-year-old stone pagoda that weighs 3.5 tons has to be done extremely carefully. Even the slightest turn towards the wrong angle can be dangerous. This 3-story stone pagoda called Seokgatap belongs at the heart of the cultural relic of Bulguksa Temple in Gyeongju.
I've been to several restoration projects, but this is by far the largest. I'm honored to be here for this historic moment.
The 10.5-meter-high Seokgatap, built during the Silla dynasty in the 751 BC, is currently designated as the country's 21st national treasure. In September 2012, the pagoda was dismantled for the restoration project after fractures were detected. Instead of regular metal, titanium was used to fill the crevices, while earth mixed with natural minerals was pumped into the interior. It marks the first time the pagoda has been restored since it was partially reconstructed in the mid-1960s after it was damaged in an attempted theft.
This project will make it possible for the national treasure to be preserved for thousands more years.
The researcher says the restored Seokgatap stone pagoda will be unveiled to the public in January. Kim Jeon, Arirang News.
Well, those are the stories we have for you at this hour. For more of the latest, don't forget to check out the website arirang.com/news. Goodbye.